Hey geeks and gamers, I got some new background art. It's all Pac-Man now. Pac-Man and Pac-Man and Pac-Man. Because I love Pac-Man. And as much as I love 80s arcade games, I also love a few other things, like Sega and the Atari. When I say the Atari, I'm talking about the Atari 2600. I am working on another Atari game guide episode. I did one of those last year. I think it was in November, something like that. And I am doing a follow-up video. I'm waiting on a few games to come in before I really do that episode. So I thought it'd be cool to do kind of like an in-between episode here. And I want to talk about Atari. I want to talk about getting into Atari, collecting Atari. Is the Atari for you? Should you get into Atari 2600? And why should you get into 2600? And I'm going to list off about maybe 3 or 4 things here. This is kind of off the cuff. But, I mean, I fell in love with Atari. I didn't grow up with the system. Unlike other consoles like the Genesis, which I love the Genesis. I didn't grow up with a 2600. I only experienced some of the games through like some compilation collections, but I didn't grow up with the console. But I got one about 3 years ago, and I fell in love with the system. So I'm here to talk about why you should get into Atari, or is Atari for you? I think that's what I'm gonna call it. Is Atari for you? And I think the first thing that you need to get over when it comes to Atari, or that you need to think about when it comes to Atari, is the type of game. That's one of the most common things. That's why I think a lot of people go for collecting Nintendo or collecting Sega or maybe some later era companies, is because of the style of games that are given to them. Playing something like the NES or the Super Nintendo, you have these big open RPG adventure type games, platformers, puzzle games, just all fighting games, all sorts of different types of games are given to you. RPGs. Whenever you play something like Atari, that's not really a thing. There are genres, don't get me wrong, but basically most of the games are one of two games. They're either really ambitious Atari type games like Adventure or Secret Quest, or they are arcade style games, either actual arcade games or totally original games for the console that still have that arcade style. So really, you need to ask yourself if you're okay with that arcade format. Now, I mean, don't get me wrong, I do love some newer games. In fact, I play my PS4 a lot. But I do love arcade-style games a lot. Like, I find a lot of enjoyment in trying to beat my high scores, trying to get further than I was. It's just super fun to play arcade-style games and just hone your skill, you know? Just because a game doesn't have a gripping narrative or like a lot of variation doesn't mean it can't be a really fun game. Don't get me wrong, Atari games can be really fun. So I think that's the first hurdle, or the first thing you really need to consider is that the type of gamer you are. Like I said, there are some other adventure style games like Adventure, Secret Quest, the Sword Quest games. There's the Indiana Jones game on the Atari. There are some like more adventure-esque type games that really do take some thought, but they aren't the majority. The majority are arcade games. The second thing is hardware. This one I think you can kind of get around now because of things like the Retron 77, which lets you play original Atari cartridges on an HD television. But if you want to go old school and you want to go all the way, you're going to want to get an actual Atari console, which these things are cheap. You can find one. I have 2 of them. I have this one, and I have my Sears Telegames, which is the one I use. It's actually plugged up right now. I don't want to unhook it. So, you know, these units don't really cost that much. nowadays. You can find it on eBay, maybe 20, 30, 40 bucks, complete with all the stuff you need. The issue is getting this thing hooked up. Power cords, regular old power cord, which you don't want to leave plugged in, by the way. Do never leave your Atari plugged in. That will fry that thing. But on top of that, getting working controllers, and this little boy. This is what you got for your video audio signal. You can find the little adapters, little coaxial adapters to screw onto the end of it, screw into the back of a TV. The problem is a lot of modern TVs don't have that anymore. That's kind of going away, or something like that, or a lot of them just won't work with it. I don't know why. The best thing I found is to either get an old CRT or get a VCR. This thing will run through a VCR, run it through a VCR, take some colored cords, run it out the front. There you go. That's an easy fix, but it's not the easiest thing to hook up. It's not even like getting like an N64 or a Sega Genesis where you can just get the RCA colored cords. You have to use the coaxial input, which can be a big hindrance. It does mean the picture's a little fuzzy. But I mean, honestly, I think playing it on a CRT like that is the way to go when it comes to Atari, because it really sets the tone. These games weren't meant for ultra 4K HD TVs or whatever. So you're maybe going to want to get a CRT. Honestly, that's my thing. Which CRTs are also super cheap. You can probably find somebody wanting to get rid of one in their basement somewhere. Like I said, if that's not your thing, you can get a Retron 77. They're out there. They're like 60 bucks, and you play them that way through your TV. The only issue is, which is my next thing, the Retron 77 doesn't do this. My third reason here to get into Atari is homebrew. The homebrew community for the Atari is huge, and I have a couple homebrew games. I plan on buying more homebrew games. The homebrew community, if you go on to AtariAge.com, the homebrew community is huge. This thing's over 40 years old. People are still making brand new games for the Atari. That's crazy. That's literally crazy. I don't see any other console really having this much support and this much love other than the Atari, which is super awesome. I love the fact that that's a thing that happens now. And they don't charge too much for their games. Some of them go from like 20 to 25. I think the most is like 50. But homebrew games are so cool. Like I said, homebrew games though don't work in the Retron 77, which is lame. So that's another reason why you're going to want an original Atari unit. Once again, they're not that much, but just experiencing brand new Atari games, it's like nothing else. It's like nothing you've ever seen before. It's crazy to pop in a brand new game into this 40-year-old console and still have a fun time. That's crazy. And I think the fourth reason, which I think I'm going to end on this, the fourth thing is collecting, the price of collecting. And once again, I've stated a couple times now that the console itself is cheap. The games are even cheaper. Some of the games, there are some rare games out there, don't get me wrong. Like I have some games that go for well over $150. Those games are just like diamonds in the rough out there. The rest of them are cheap. Most of the Atari games that you're gonna find are dirt cheap. Like maybe you'll pay $8, $7. A lot of times on eBay, people sell them in bundles for like 20 bucks. You get like 5 or 6 games bundled together. That's a sweet deal. And when it comes to Atari collecting, I think I'm at about 80. I think I'm at 87 games now officially. I'm waiting, including the ones I just ordered. I'm at 87 games. Atari collecting is super cheap. Like for the price of a new PS4 game or something, you could buy at least like 20 Atari games. Like that's a lot of bang for your buck there. So if you're like into collecting, into really getting into that era of gaming, this is a great place to start because it is super cheap. Some of the other Atari consoles, like the 5200 and 7800, those will cost you a little more with the consoles and games. But the 2600 games are cheap. That's all I can say about that, is that you're not going to pay too much for a game, unless you're going for one of the more hard to find games. But most of the games, pretty cheap. And I think what I'm going to end on here is that the Atari itself, I know the graphics aren't like the best thing in the world, and the games are simple, and everything with the Atari is just archaic, and you know, it was like the beginning. It was like watching old black and white movies or something. You know, it's like the beginning of an art form. But I think there's a certain simplicity in there that is charming. I love the way Atari games look and sound. I love the way that the console looks. I love the fact that it has all the switches on the front. I love the simple joystick controller or the paddle controllers. It's just a really simple console, and I think that's one of the biggest hooks for me, is that I don't have to download 15 patches for this thing. I don't have 12 buttons on my controller. Atari games, you pop them in, you just have fun. That's the basic here. So take that knowledge, take what I just shared, and decide, is Atari for you? Maybe you haven't thought about getting into Atari. Maybe you thought maybe it was going to be a little pricey. Maybe you thought, I don't know how I could even do it. I'm telling you, if you think you want to get into Atari collecting, go for it. Definitely go for it, because it is worth it. It is, I find collecting for the Atari is very enjoyable. And there are other people out there too. Once again, check AtariAge.com. There's people on that site that know way more than I do, because they've been into the scene for way longer than I have. And you can find people that are into the same type of thing you are. You know, don't be afraid to collect for Atari just because all your friends collect for Nintendo or play PlayStation or go for the Xbox or whatever. Just have fun. Like that's the basic here. It's just to have fun. With that said, guys, like I said, next time I will be back with an Atari Game Guide episode. I'm also working on an Earth Defense Force 5 video. I don't know when the hell that's going to be done. That game's fucking huge, by the way. Earth Defense Force 5 is a huge-ass game. So I'm taking my time with that one. But next video, Atari Game Guide, Volume 2, or whatever the hell, Episode 2, whatever the hell I'm calling it. Volume episode, I don't know what I called the first one, actually. I don't know if I called it Volume or Episode. I need to go back and look. But the second one of those, coming soon. Going to have 10 Atari games. Hey, if you watched the first one and you liked it and you want to see me talk about a certain Atari game, comment it. See if I have it. There's a good chance I do. And if I do, I will bring it up in this episode of the Atari Game Guide. Anyway, see you guys later.
Hey geeks and gamers, TurboBot90013 here. Remember to subscribe to the Turbo Zone for more content. The Arcade Overlord, thank you. Stay retro. Turbo Zone.